The scars on my shoulder aren't just tissue. They're a map of a place I never truly left. They thrum when the weather changes. A dull, tidal ache that pulls me back to the afternoon the sun seemed to die in the high Uintas, when a quiet basin turned into a slaughterhouse. I was 6 miles deep in the Black Fork Basin, where silence has weight. The air tasted of frost and old needles. I'd walked these woods for years and told myself that experience was the same thing as humility. I carried bear spray, a GPS, and the easy confidence of someone who believed wilderness was a gallery to be admired, not a cathedral that demanded respect. Then the quiet broke. It wasn't a roar. It was the sound of something heavy being slammed against a tree, wet and dull. I rounded a stand of stunted firs and saw her. A wall of matted, honey-colored fur rose from a half-buried elk carcass. Her muzzle was dark with blood. The smell hit me first. Rotten iron, sweet and suffocating, layered with the sharp musk of a predator. 2 cubs flickered at the edge of my vision, shadows darting through brush. Her eyes found mine. They weren't wild or frenzied. They were empty, fixed points of intent. She didn't bluff. She dropped her head, shoulders rolling like plates of stone, and charged. I reached for the bear spray, fingers numb and clumsy. The safety clip popped free. I squeezed the trigger just as the world collapsed into fur and motion. An orange cloud bloomed between us, thin and useless in the cold air. She cut through it without slowing. My ribs didn't crack so much as dissolve. For a heartbeat, I was airborne. Then the ground rushed up and drove the breath and something deeper out of me. Training surfaced through the shock. Don't fight, protect your neck, play dead. It's one thing to know that, it's another to lie there while you are taken apart. I rolled onto my stomach and laced my fingers behind my head. Then her weight pinned me into the mud. Her breath washed over my neck. Hot, foul, copper and carrion. The first bite came down on my shoulder. More pressure than pain. A crushing force that carried sound with it. I heard bone protest. A muffled crunch like walnuts under a boot. I bit my tongue to keep from screaming. Blood filled my mouth. Dirt pressed into my eyes. She hooked a claw into my back strap and flipped me like a toy. I went slack, letting myself become weightless in her grip. Her jaw closed on my thigh. I felt tendons draw tight. Felt the world narrow into a white, blinding focus that burned thought away. I watched from somewhere far off as fabric and skin gave way. My leg reduced to something raw and unrecognizable. Then nothing. The pressure lifted. She stood over me, breathing, deciding. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I waited for the end. After a long, hollow stretch of time, her footsteps retreated. Heavy, deliberate. I heard her lead the cubs back into the trees, leaving what she believed was a finished thing. I lay there for an hour, or a lifetime. When I finally moved, my body felt like broken glass, stitched together with paper. I looked down at my leg and understood, with strange calm, that I couldn't stay. Every sound carried menace. Every snapping twig was her returning. The terror wasn't just pain. It was the realization that I had stopped being a person. I had become meat. I crawled. With one arm working, I dragged myself across the forest floor, my ruined leg trailing behind me. The ground took its due. I reached a narrow creek, usually a comfort. Now it was an obstacle. I slid into the water, the cold biting into my open wounds so sharply my vision tunneled. I nearly lost consciousness with my face inches from the surface. I hauled myself into the far bank, shaking uncontrollably. "Not here," I whispered. "Don't die in the mud." My satellite messenger was crushed. Screen spiderwebbed. Casing split. I pressed the SOS anyway. Again and again. Nothing. Alone isn't a strong enough word for that moment. As the sun dropped behind the peaks, the temperature followed. Blood loss and cold worked together, thinning my thoughts. I wedged myself beneath a fallen cedar and curled in on what still worked, my jacket stiffening where blood froze. I was slipping when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the basin. "Hey, over there! Check the creek bed!" A human voice, rough, urgent, beautiful. I tried to shout, only air came out. I found my whistle by touch and forced a breath through it. The sound was weak, barely there. A beam of light cut through the trees. "I hear something. By the cedar." 3 figures broke through the brush. Hikers, flannel, headlamps, the startled look of men who expected an empty trailhead. One of them stared down at me and went pale. "Jesus," he said quietly. "He's been mauled." They had no helicopter, no morphine, just gauze, duct tape, and a survival blanket. Carrying me wasn't possible, not intact. So they built something from saplings and their own jacket. "We're getting you out," one of them, Mark, kept saying. "Just stay with us. Look at my light." Every step sent fire through what was left of me. When they stumbled, my bones grated, and I finally screamed. Long, ragged sounds that echoed off the canyon walls. They talked constantly, filling the dark with ordinary things. Jobs, families, the food they promised me at the trailhead, anything to keep me tethered. They carried me 4 miles through the night. Stars drifted overhead between branches. "Almost there," Mark said. "I see the lights." The ambulance sirens reached us before the parking lot did. Wild, rising notes that didn't belong to the mountains. They transferred me to the gurney, an oxygen mask pressed over my face. I caught Mark's sleeve with my good hand and held on. I couldn't speak. I didn't need to. I live in the city now, wrapped in concrete and steel. People think that means safety, but sometimes the wind howls between buildings just right, and I smell pine and iron. Then I'm back there again. I learned later that those 3 men stayed because they noticed my car at the trailhead and knew something was wrong. They weren't trained heroes. They were just people who refused to leave a stranger to the dark. Doctors rebuilt what they could. They couldn't fix the way the dark looks back at me now, or the truth I learned out there, that beauty and teeth grow from the same soil, and that survival, more often than not, depends on whether someone else decides you're worth the wait. The scars on my palms are what I notice most, not the jagged purple furrows on my calves where the claws hooked in, not the long white seam along my ribs where surgeons stitched me back together, but the deep, silvery, rugged skin of my hands. They look like they belong to someone older than I am, someone who worked a lifetime with rope and stone. They are the marks of a man who tried to climb his way out of the food chain, who wrapped his fingers around rough pine bark and refused to let go, driven by a terror so pure it froze his blood even as it burned through his muscles. I was deep in the Cabinet Mountains when the world shifted its rules. It was blue hour, that narrow, unsettled stretch of time after the sun has dropped behind the ridgeline, but before the stars arrived to replace it. The forest hadn't gone dark yet. It had gone dim. Everything was washed in gray-green, edges softened, distances deceptive. Sound carried strangely. My breath seemed too loud. My boots felt like an intrusion. I was hiking back toward my base camp, 6 miles from the nearest trailhead. My pack was heavy with the few days of food and gear. My shoulders sore in that familiar, comforting way. I was thinking about the simple pleasure of routine, unshouldering the pack, boiling water, sliding into a sleeping bag while the night settled in around me. I had walked this terrain before. I believe I understood it. Then came the snap. At first my mind tried to make it small, a squirrel, a falling cone. But it wasn't a twig. It was a branch, thick as a human wrist, splitting cleanly under weight that did not belong to anything small. The sound cracked through the trees and stopped me cold. I turned. 40 yards away, a shadow separated itself from the timber. It was a black bear, but not the kind people picture when they talk about nuisance animals and campground raids. This was a boar, old, heavy through the shoulders, his body scarred and blocky with age. His fur was dark and clotted in places with dried mud. He smelled wrong, even from a distance, sour, rank, the musk of something that had learned it did not need to hurry. He didn't rear up. He didn't huff or pop his jaws. There was no display, no warning. He lowered his head. His spine arced like a bowstring pulled tight, and he started toward me in a silent, rolling lope that devoured ground in 3-foot bounds. I knew the rules. Everybody knows the rules. Don't run, stand your ground, make yourself big. But rules belong to the thinking part of the brain. And when several 100 pounds of muscle and teeth begin closing distance with terrifying efficiency, something older takes control. My body decided before my mind could argue. I shrugged out of my pack and let it fall, a useless offering, and sprinted. The nearest lodgepole pine stood maybe 20 feet away. I didn't think about whether it would hold me or how high I'd need to climb. I saw only escape. The lowest branch was 7 feet up. I jumped badly, a clumsy, desperate leap, caught the limb with my fingertips and swung my weight upward as pain flared in my shoulders. I hauled myself onto the tree. I was 10 feet off the ground when the trunk shuddered. I looked down. The bear was already at the base of the tree. For a fraction of a second, some stupid, hopeful part of me expected him to stop, to look up, reconsider, and wander off. Instead, he surged upward. Black bears climb as easily as men climb ladders. Their claws bite into bark like steel spikes. Their hind legs drive them upward in a powerful hitching motion that wastes no energy. I heard it immediately. The sound of claws punching in the soft pine sounded exactly like someone driving nails into wood. It was steady, confident, unbearably close. I climbed. Branches tore at my arms and face. Bark peeled skin away from my palms and knuckles. I felt none of it. I climbed past 15 feet, then 20, the trunk narrowing, the branches thinning. The tree began to sway under our combined weight, a slow, nauseating motion that made my stomach lurch. The sound followed me. Then it stopped. I looked down again. He was 5 feet below me. We hung there together, suspended between the darkening ground and a sky just beginning to show its first stars. I could smell him now. Hot breath, iron and rot, wet fur. He huffed low in his chest, a sound that vibrated through the trunk and into my ribs. He waited. Without warning, he lunged. One massive paw shot upward, claws raking across the heel of my boot. The impact jolted my legs so hard, my teeth clicked together. I kicked down with my other foot, driving the sole of my boot into his face. It felt like kicking a granite boulder. He roared then, raw, furious, sound that tore through the basin and echoed back in broken pieces. The tree whipped violently, branches snapping, needles raining down. I wrapped my arms and leg around the trunk, grasping, fighting not to be shaken loose. He repositioned and climbed another foot. His jaws snapped inches away from my ankle, the sound sharp and final, like a steel trap closing. I fumbled blindly into my pocket, fingers shaking so badly I nearly dropped it, and found the only thing I had left to fight with, a folding pocket knife, barely 3 inches of blade. When he reached again, muzzle lifting, I leaned down and drove the knife into the soft darkness beneath his nose. I felt it sink. The sound he made wasn't a roar. It was a high, shrill bawl of pain and rage. He lost his grip and slid down the trunk in a shower of bark, claws carving deep, spiraling gouges before he caught himself again. He clung there, panting, furious, unwilling to give ground. We stayed like that. Minutes stretched into hours. I crouched in the crown of the tree, my muscles cramping, my hands numb and locked into claws of their own. Any movement set pain flaring through my forearms. Below me, the bear remained, silent, patient, conserving energy. Every time I shifted, the trunk trembled as he adjusted his weight in response. Cold crept in slowly. It stiffened my joints, slowed my thoughts. My muscles began to twitch uncontrollably. I knew the danger now wasn't just the bear. It was gravity, exhaustion, the simple failure of flesh. I took my belt off with shaking hands and looped it around a branch in my waist, tying myself to the tree like a climber on a fraying rope. "Go away," I whispered into the dark. "Please." He didn't move. He watched. Salvation came from the trail. At first I thought I was hallucinating, small flickering lights weaving through the trees below. Then I heard voices, human voices. "Help!" I screamed, tearing my throat raw. "Up here, the tree." The bear heard them too. He shifted attention, drawn downwards. 3 Forest Service rangers emerged from the timber, headlamps sweeping wildly as they took in the scene. One of them shouted and fired a bear banger. The crack and flash split the woods like a gunshot. That was enough. The bear grunted, a sound of pure frustration, and slid down the trunk with terrifying speed. He hit the ground and vanished into the brush, leaving silence behind. I couldn't climb down on my own. My legs wouldn't respond. My hands locked into rigid hooks. The rangers talked to me constantly as they guided me down, catching me as I slid the last few feet and collapsed into the dirt. One of them ran her lights up the tree, illuminating shredded bark and deep gouges spiraling upward. "You're lucky," she said quietly. "Another few feet and he would have gotten you." I didn't answer. I sat there shaking, wrapped around a cup of lukewarm coffee, watching the shadows move and listen to my heart finally slow. I don't enter the woods at sunset anymore. I still hear the sounds of claws on the wood in my sleep. When I see a tall tree now, I don't see beauty. I see a ladder. I see the narrow margin where survival shrinks to bark, breath, and grip. The doctors fix my hands, but the skin is different, thicker, less sensitive. It's the skin of a man who learned, suspended between earth and sky, that the last thing between him and the end of the world was how hard he could hold on. I was deep in the Absaraka backcountry, where the geography doesn't care about your plans. It was early September. The aspens were beginning to bleed gold, their leaves shivering in a wind I couldn't feel. I was traveling light, no partners, no horse, just the weight of my own breath and gear on my back. I understood the math of the woods. I had bear spray tethered to my chest and a 10mm Glock on my hip, stoked with 200 grain hard cast lead. I didn't carry them out of bravado. I carried them because I knew that in the backcountry, you are not at the top of the food chain. You are simply a guest who hasn't been asked to leave yet. She didn't emerge, she materialized. She burst from a wall of willow like a freight train jumping the tracks. No warning huff, no tooth popping, just a silent, low to the ground charge that turned 30 yards of distance into 10 in the blink of an eye. She was a nightmare in blonde and silver, her hump heaving, her eyes fixed on my throat with a terrifying singular intelligence. My brain didn't have time for a monologue. It went into a cold, mechanical survival state. I ripped the spray from my chest, my thumb shearing the safety clip off. I didn't even have time to extend my arm fully before I buried the trigger. A wall of orange spray flared out, a desperate chemical shield. She didn't veer. She didn't flinch. She hit the orange mist and simply inhaled it, her momentum carrying her through the cloud like a ghost through a curtain. I dropped the canister as her weight hit the 5-yard mark. My hand found the Glock, not through thought, but through thousands of repetition of muscle memory. The first shot was a panic reflex, a thunderclap that went wide into the brush. The second caught her in the high shoulder. I saw the fur bunch and the spray of red, but it was like throwing a pebble at a moving car. She was on me. I backpedaled, my heel catching a root. As I went down, the world slowed into a series of jagged, high-definition snapshots. I saw the individual beads of moisture on her muzzle. I saw the yellowed curve of her canines. She swiped as I fell. It wasn't a hit. It was a structural collapse. Her claws, thick as steak knives, unzipped my thigh. The sensation wasn't pain. It was a cold, sickening unzip of my reality. I hit the dirt hard, my vision splashing with white sparks. I didn't think. I rolled to my left, the gun still a heavy, vibrating extension of my arm. I felt the heat of her breath on my neck, a foul mix of rotted elk and bile. I pressed the muzzle into the mass of fur passing over me and squeezed the trigger until the world was nothing but noise. The final shot was the one that mattered. It took her in the neck, severing the connection between the brain and the machine. She collapsed forward, her massive weight skidding through the dirt, coming to a rest so close that her front paw was touching my foot. The slide locked back. The silence returned, heavier than before. I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollowed out, as if she had reached inside me and scooped out everything but the animal fear. I looked at my leg. The denim was shredded, a dark, hot pool spreading beneath me. I didn't feel the agony yet. That was still minutes away. But I saw the white of the fat and the dark throb of the muscle. I pulled my belt, looping it high on my hip, and twisting it with a stick until the flow slowed to a trickle. I sat there for an hour, staring at her. Up close, she was a goddess of the high country. Old scars crisscrossed her nose. Her claws were worn down from a decade of digging and killing. She had been winning for a long time. I had only won once, and I knew how much of that win was luck dressed up as preparation. I hiked out at dawn, using a sturdy branch as a crutch, my leg a numb, heavy log. Every step was a negotiation with the earth. People ask me now if I'm glad I had the gun. They want a political answer. They want to talk about ballistics and stopping power. I tell them I'm glad I didn't have to find out what the dirt tastes like when you're dying. I still go back. I still carry the spray and the Glock. But I walk differently now. I don't look at the woods as a sanctuary anymore. I look at them as a place of narrow margins, where life and death are separated by seconds, inches, and the willingness to become just as violent as the thing trying to eat you.